Hi, everybody. My name is Eugene Turk. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome you to our monthly coach webinar for November 2022. Hope everyone is doing well, and thank you so much for joining us today. This morning, we are thrilled to have Gord Smith with a presentation on turning your largest expense into a strategic advantage. For those of you who may not be familiar with Gord, he is a seasoned sales and marketing leader, having worked with a number of leading technology and service firms such as Deloitte, SAP, Hitachi, Cybel, and NCR, just to name a few. Gord is a passionate lifelong learner and a believer of constant reinvention. He is the founder of Alta Consulting, a boutique management consulting firm that helps companies engineer more revenue. He is a scaling up certified coach, and in using that methodology, Alta specializes in working with small to mid-sized organizations that are looking to grow rapidly and achieve profitability. As a coach, Gord shares his experience in sales performance, marketing, leadership development, training, product development, and management consultant to help his clients maximize growth and drive scale. And we are certainly honored to have Gord present for us this month. As always, one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. So please feel free to pose your questions using the chat feature or the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will direct those questions to Gord. There will be 2 question breaks in his presentation, or we can present them to him at the conclusion of his presentation. Again, thanks everybody for attending this Align Coach webinar, and I will turn the microphone over to Gord. Thanks, Gord.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen quickly here and bring it up in presentation mode. There we go. We're good to go. Hi, welcome everybody. Good morning. Happy to spend some time with you on compensation. I'm going to quickly recap. Eugene talked a lot about my background. Just a couple subtleties. My company, Alta Consulting, we spend our time largely on growth coaching and sales consulting. So we combine those 2 disciplines to deliver results to clients. And the intersection with compensation is that we're often designing compensation systems for clients, as it's kind of an issue in many cases, and or on the sales side, we do a lot of sales compensation type work. This is kind of some of the results we've delivered, and we have kind of a goal of creating $1 billion of wealth in our client community. We're on our way to doing that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 2 things today. I'm going to talk about principles of compensation design from the scaling up perspective. And at the end of that section of the presentation, we'll have a few questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the 7 principles of sales compensation design, which is related, but there are some subtleties around designing sales compensation. As mentioned by Eugene, feel free to jump in with chat questions, and we'll get to them at a couple points in the presentation. Okay, so here's some excerpts from clients and client comments and so forth. And I think some of these will resonate with you. I wanted to share them. And maybe these will result in questions. I gave a star performer a raise. Now everybody is marching into my office and demanding one too. So this is a common thing we hear. You have one really good employee, you change the compensation, and as we know, the employees talk, and you create a behavior that, if you ask for a raise, you're going to get one. Second introductory comment would be, if someone was looking closely at our payroll, it would be very hard to rationalize why we pay certain people what we do. So, the compensation system has grown up organically, and there's one person being paid one way and another person being paid a different way and a third person being paying a different way. There's no overall strategy or approach, and it gets to be a little bit chaotic. So that might be reflective of your organization, maybe not. The third one, I hear this a lot from clients. It seems like our bonus plans have become entitlements. We're just giving money away. So people begin to expect that they're going to get that quarterly bonus or that annual bonus or that individual bonus, and it doesn't get tied to any kind of formulaic calculation. There's been some big changes in comp. Here's a couple of examples. So people may have caught this. Google last year, they announced that they're going to cut the pay of people who work from home, especially if their their living expenses, like if they move from New York to a very rural area where expenses are different. So this is kind of strategic, just examples of strategic shifts in compensation. In some cases, it was very material. It was up to 25% reduction in pay. And when you walk through the principles of comp design, you'll see how this is, may reflect a good thing on Google's behalf. So that's a big shift. The second one here is Bank of America. So Bank of America, if you looked at their sort of the lower end of their workforce, the individuals that early in their career or weren't as significantly paid as some of the more senior people, they had put a system in place that was largely cash bonuses. And again, that entitlement kind of mentality crept into their bonus structure, and they weren't getting the kind of engagement, results from, some of those staff in that cohort. So what they did is they've issued stock to 97% of the company. Now it's proportional to your, salary and, size, the role or level that you're at. But what they wanted was people to act like owners, and what they wanted was to create an environment that would be, more focused on retention. So this is a good example of doing exactly that by changing your compensation and issuing or making stock options available basically to the entire company. So this is another example of some of the shifts that have made in compensations from some big organizations like Google and Bank of America. So let's talk about the principles of compensation design. So first, the overarching principle of compensation design is to incentivize behaviors that from your employees that customers will appreciate and allow and get them to reach into their wallets and spend more money. So it has a lot to do with your brand promise. What are the expectations that are being set? What can customers count on from your organization? Who is your core customer and what do they expect? Right. And what is your strategy and what is your culture? So the compensation should directly tie to those examples. And I have a bunch of client examples I'm going to share of how they've done that. But first start with the customer, first start with your brand promise, and that will help align your compensation strategically. When it has that alignment, it turns into a strategic advantage as opposed to just compensation or just an expense. It is a difficult thing to get right. And, constantly having open, kind of analysis of your comp and changing it frequently, it's emotional, right? It tends to create a lot of extra work. So, we would recommend, get it right and get out of sight, and spend the time to kind of analyze it correctly and get your compensation, very well aligned. So here are the 5 principles. I'm going to go through some examples of each one, but be different, align your compensation to your culture and strategy. That's what creates the strategic advantage. Many companies, when they're designing compensation, they just go, okay, well, what are my competitors doing? Let's look at our competitors, and then let's copy their compensation. Let's just use their compensation. It must be good. And the problem with that is that your culture is different. Your core customer may be different. Your business is different, right? So that often is not a great strategy. Try to design something that's different. And we'll talk a little bit about some examples of different. Fairness, not sameness. So not every employee in your company has the same performance level. There are, strong performers, high performers, A players. and there are B players, there should be a provision in compensation program to make sure that the exceptional performers receive exceptional compensation. Not the kind of watered down approach where you're paying everybody the same, everybody has the same approach, and your top performers aren't rewarded differentially based on their performance. The third principle is easy on the carrots. So this is all about individual incentives and working with them and how they work and things like that, which is critically important to get right. But there's a lot of research out there that would suggest that individual incentives don't provide the level of motivation that people think that they do. Using critical numbers from a growth platform like Scaling Up, and creating a gamified short-term incentive that provides that opportunity for surprise and engagement is a critical component. And then sharing is caring, sharing some kind of value, whether it's value of the company or profits, to begin to get people to think like and act like owners and make decisions like owners. So those are the 5 principles. I'm going to jump into each one, and we'll talk about it a little bit more thoroughly. So here's how they relate, right, to elements of a compensation plan. So Be Different is about having a different type of compensation model that's going to support your cultural strategy, brand promise, core customer. That's chapter number 1. This is from the Scaling Up book, Compensation. Chapter number 2, Base Pay. This is about fairness, not sameness. So you're disproportionately rewarding your top performers. Individual incentives tie to easy on the carrots. Gain sharing ties to gamifying these critical numbers and other aspects of your business. Sharing and caring is about creating that owner mentality by distributing value or profits in some meaningful way to the entire company. Some of these are individual, like fairness, not sameness, and easy on the carrots, and some are team-based. Okay, so Be Different. This is a comment from Daniel Cabell, who wrote the book Hiring Strange. Is if you have the same people, as you hire the same type of people as your competitors, then you're likely to have the same kind of result or same kind of feel for your customers in the market. If you can figure out, how to hire, like I call it, alternative hires or non-traditional hires, that they tend to do, provide a differentiation to your company. I spent years working at SAP, a company you've probably heard of. And I was running their software sales group, et cetera. And we had a phenomenal consultant, probably the best SAP consultant I've ever worked with. And, usually you would think that would be somebody with a finance background and years of experience. She actually started in the company as the receptionist, right? She had a good attitude, humble, hungry, and smart, right? That type of background. And she, had unbelievable results, but came as a non-traditional hire. So that's one of the ways to be, is getting strange people or different people. So I have a quick poll for you here. How well does your compensation align with your brand promise and culture? We'll open up the poll. Eugene, you'll give us the results.
I will. We'll give everybody just a few seconds to answer the poll. People are still answering, so I won't close it just yet.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the results on this one. They tend to can be all over the place. That's kind of what I expect, but we'll see.
All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Somewhat aligned, very aligned, neutral. Okay, yeah, they are kind of all over the place. It's good that there's many that are somewhat aligned. This alignment between brand promise and culture is what creates the strategic advantage. And I'm going to give you some client examples of that. But that's the area that, putting some extra effort in terms of creating those measures and alignments will pay off in great dividends.
Gord, if I may just interrupt one question, pardon me, because we did have a question that was posed because someone didn't quite understand what the question means. Maybe you could just briefly help explain.
Yeah. So compensation is about behaviors, right? And so, so your compensation system or approach should reward behaviors that align to your brand promise or to your company culture, your core values. So your brand promise is what your customers expect. So, for example, we're going to talk about Lincoln Electric that, manufactures welding equipment, and their core promise to their customers quality products. So they've changed their compensation system so that their manufacturing staff is paid on, how many high quality products they produce. On the culture side, it's, there's some rewards or approach to kind of reinforce the culture or the core values. That's really what it means. Is it aligned? So brand promise is what does your core customer expect? And can you create a compensation system that creates those behaviors in your staff? I hope that helps. I have a couple other examples that will help make this more clear. All right. Okay, so here's some ideas around aligning compensation with cultures. So you're incenting, as I said, you're incenting behaviors on things that your customer appreciates, so they value. At the heart of it is your brand promise. Your compensation is aligned with your values, so your core values. If you've developed those, that I've seen this in professional services companies where a portion of their year-end bonus is tied to what they call firm activities, which are largely culturally related, and their part of their financial bonus is tied directly to that. I mentioned if you don't expect your employees to be different if you hire just like everybody else, if you hire the same type of people. And so that's another dimension of aligning to culture and strategy. And of course, everybody knows that an A player in your organization will create more A players. A B player creates B and C players. So the overarching part of compensation is to have a philosophy, that has the right framework in place so that people are, executing the behaviors that relate to your culture and strategy. So those are the four things to get started is think about what those behaviors are and how to align them in these dimensions. So here's an example. Okay, so Lincoln Electric is a manufacturer of welding equipment. They're quite a long-standing company. They were, founded in the 30s. They have almost 100 years of history. They have a very different type of compensation system. So they reward their manufacturing staff on piecework. So they get paid, for every unit of high quality, welding equipment that they produce. So if they take a vacation, they don't get paid. If they miss a day of work, they don't get paid. So that's a very different approach to compensation. Now, why do they do that? Because their brand promise is high quality welding equipment, and there's no base pay. It's all variable, 100% variable based on what they produce, and they're amongst the highest paid manufacturing workers in North America based on this system. So if you look at those dimensions, this is very different, right? It's tied to their strategy because their brand promise is, a high quality equipment, and this is not for everyone. So when they, are recruiting new people, for example, if somebody who wouldn't be comfortable in this type of system would not join the company, right? So this is an example of the first two principles, right? Around being different, and also the overarching principle of tying it to and incentivize people to produce something that would cause people to purchase more or continue to buy your product. I have a bunch of clients in the manufacturing sector that use their equipment, and they're kind of the premium provider of welding equipment. Like, they're well recognized as kind of the best in this category. So that gives you example of tying it to a little to strategy and culture. Here's a second example. So this is out of Ireland. This is Citybin, and you can imagine that they were on a growth path and needed to hire quite a few additional staff to support their collection activities, recycling and garbage and other things. And this was kind of their main constraint. Very difficult to find people, right? And then it's also difficult to find people that would align around their values, but also around what customers expect. And in their particular case, a customer doesn't want to have, and we've all had this, kind of someone show up, pick up their recycling, throw the bin on their front lawn, maybe a bunch of stuff falls out of the bin, or they want pick up my recycling, put the bin back where it was, make sure it's empty, friendly in the process, etc. So they couldn't find people, and so what they did was they had one employee on their team, highly motivated person, and that particular individual, he loved working at Citybin because he was a gym buff, right? He went to a workout gym. He probably did a little bit of jiu-jitsu or boxing or something like that, and he just thought, where else could I get a job where I work out all day and I get paid for it, right? So that tweaked a little interest. Getting back to Daniel Cable's book about change to strange, hiring non-traditional workforce, they put together a campaign. You can see the campaign insert on the right here, and they went after people that worked out in gyms as a way to recruit staff. And they had it resonated with them, get paid while you work out, be a driver's assistant. And they were able to close their labor gap by focusing on a non-traditional, workforce hire. And we're able to get increase their staff to the level that they could have some significant growth. So that ties together a couple of concepts. One is we talked about hiring different people. They're definitely hiring different people. Those type of people, were thrilled to be at work. So you're less likely to have, the bin thrown on the lawn and, garbage or recycling all over the lawn, because they're motivated and excited to be there because they're getting paid while they work out. Okay. So that's the first one. Fairness, not sameness, right? So we all know that compensation it's a proxy for self-worth, right? It's people view their value by how much they're getting paid. It's, when you start to change around people's compensation, it can come with at great peril, right? And, the notion of performance and sameness, I think, is critically important. That, the people that are the highest performers in a company, should have a disproportionate amount of pay. The way we see this tackled in industry is kind of a lot of very wide pay bands. So rather than having something very narrow, we've worked with a bunch of companies and looked at wider pay bands as a way to you kind deal with this performance gap. Here's some other ideas around fairness, not sameness, is really look at the compensation being more formulaic and less discretionary. So driven off metrics, base pay itself is not motivational, right? But people will be motivated if they think that they're being paid fairly. We've seen companies that have, put into place, some guardrails around compensation. One in particular in Seattle, name escapes me, but they have a minimum base salary of 70,000 because they see that as a proxy of, people will be reasonably happy with that type of base salary. Wide pay bands. So a good example in the consulting industry, which where we've done a bit of work, is they put into place what would be called consulting levels. So very clear formulaic ways to move from one level to the next. So you might have 7 levels in a compensation structure or in a consulting level framework. And it's very clear how someone moves from one level to the next, which makes it far less discretionary. It's not like, hey, Gord's a good guy, let's move him from level 2 consultant to level 3. And base pay are determined by, what competencies do you have? Have you sustained performance, not just 1 year, but several years, and, the labor market. So those are some ideas around, putting together base pay that's fair, with these bands, and also with formulaic ways in which to move from one level to the next. Okay, obviously, I talked a little bit about compensation being a proxy for self-worth, right? We'll move to the third, kind of dimension, which is incentive pay, individual incentive pay. So this is super interesting statistics. So 97% of executives believe they are among the top 10% in terms of performance, or top 2% of performers. That can't possibly be true, right? So people think that maybe their performance is higher than it actually is, right? So I'm going to launch another poll here just on variable pay. This is individual variable pay. Do any of you use any of the following variable pay strategies? And we're waiting for some responses.
They're coming in.
They're coming in. Okay, good.
Yep. We'll give everybody just a few more seconds to enter their answer. All right, we'll go ahead and end the poll.
Be interested in this, yeah.
And share the results.
Yeah, so discretionary spot bonus company. Okay, all right. Yeah, so it's pretty widely distributed, right? We'll talk a little bit here about incentive pay, and let me switch gears. It's good to see company performance as the largest one, for sure.
And Gord, I will note that there was a comment that the questionnaire doesn't support multi-select, so some of our participants may actually be doing more than just one. More than just one. Okay. All right. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so here, in terms of individual incentives, one is the frequency of individual incentives. Generally, there's more impact when it's re-earned in a kind of a quarterly basis. But there's 3 effects. One is selection effect. So if you think about Lincoln Electric, you're going to come and work here, you're going to make a lot of money, but it's all piecework. Your individual incentives, when they're communicated during the recruiting process, have a selection effect. People will either want to work there or they won't want to work there. I've spent a lot of time in sales, so I have this concept I call base huggers. Is the salesperson comes in, oh, the base isn't big enough, right? And that immediately sends off alarm bells to me that that they may not be performance driven, right? So do they want to work here? The information effect. What's important in the case of Lincoln Electric, right? What's important? High quality manufacturing and making high quality products, right? So it does send what you're measuring in terms of your individual incentives, sends a message as to what's important, which is another sort of effect of individual incentives. And 3 is that
the motivational effect. One would argue, most of the theory argues that, individual incentives don't necessarily have the motivational impact that organizations think they do. I think the one exception would be the sales type compensation, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But those are the three things that individual incentives kind of affect, and good design of them. You're trying to have a positive impact. I think the first one really resonates with me is, when you describe that should be almost like a selection criteria for people that want to work there. So I'll jump back to the sales area, right? That, if somebody is pushing back on a large variable component of their sales compensation, there's probably a reason for that. They may not be the right person for your organization, because they're not willing to put a significant part of their pay at risk relative to performance. Okay, so here's an example. So Egon Zandler, so they're they started in Germany. They've been around for 50 years. They're a high-end executive recruiter. In the recruiting field, what do clients want? They want high quality candidates. They want long-term relationships. Most of the recruiting industry is paid on billings or commissions, right? And so Egon Zandler operates as a partnership. So what they've done that's different, that also relates to their core customer and their brand promise, is that they do profit sharing in terms of all of their variable comp, right? And it's shared with the 300, partners, and it's somewhat, the profit sharing is based on tenure of the partner. So the longer you stay, the larger your profit sharing is. And this creates an environment where they would, instead of candidate hoarding, like if you're in the Toronto office and you work for a recruiting firm, I'm going to control all the candidates because I get paid in my individual candidate placements. In this model, you're much more likely to share your candidates because you're going to be rewarded for them anyways, because it's a global profit pool based on tenure. So that's a very different way that they're paying relative to the traditional recruiting areas. And it's also aligned to their strategy, which is about bringing forward the best candidates. That's what clients expect, and long-term relationships. Okay. Gamify games. That's the fourth principle of good compensation design. And this is these are short-term incentives. You can think of, I don't know, maybe a casino or the thrill of gambling or things like that, where you create energy in the organization by having these short-term incentives. They're not necessarily big, but they create a bit of a buzz. And sort of the principle that's discussed here is that people are often, it's not the logic you're appealing to, it's psychological. People are psychological as much as they are logical. So in terms of gamifying, and I'll give you an example, if you have a critical metric, like this quarter, we're trying to increase referrals, as an example. I've seen a client do something with this, and they set a target for, the amount of internal referrals. It could be for, employees, or it could be external referrals for new clients. And then you have, some sort of a gamification for that quarter where, maybe if you generate a certain volume of referrals, there's a cash incentive, or maybe there could be some sort of non-monetary reward, like a team event or something like that. But these create a level of fun and excitement. They also help drive a critical number, which helps with your goals, and it makes the organization a fun place to work. So I had a client that they did this with their metrics out of their quarterly plans, and they had a big wheel at their quarterly meeting, almost kind of like the Wheel of Fortune, where you spin it, and they had different prizes. And they would, people would come up, if they made their number, their metric, and they would spin the wheel and walk home with something. And so it was double gamified. Not only was the critical number gamified, but they spin the wheel. One person might go home with a gift certificate. Another one might go away with a week away at a resort, right? So that sort of short-term gamification creates energy in the organization. So here's an example. This is Mini Movers. Obviously they're a moving company. What does the customer expect? They expect nothing broken or no damage to their house. I know I moved into a house a number of years ago now, and I was quite disappointed because the movers had scratched my brand new house, the living room floor, when they put the couches in, right? So that industry, generally for insurance, it's 3% of revenue to cover damages. So what Mini Movers did was they created an incentive that if nothing was broken or there was no damage, which is what the customer wanted, again, it was back to the customer, what behaviors can create, that they would take 3% of revenue for that job and they would share it as a team with that moving team. And so they'd go for job after job where there was no damage, that they would share that money. And it ended up being fairly material. It could be as much as $1,000 for a team member in a quarter. And so they gamified with a short-term incentive this sort of moving with no damage or no incidents as a way to motivate and incent the staff. And they also saved on insurance. They canceled the insurance policy. Okay, so last area is sharing is caring, which is this notion of sharing value or sharing profit. So it's not necessarily that it's going to create any kind of significant motivation effect. It's that the staff will make different decisions. Their decision making will be different. They make decisions based on what's good for the company and what's good for them. And it's that acting like an owner kind of approach that creates the difference. So here is kind of an overall model, right? So, I guess this would be close to, it could be stock options in some cases. It could be profit sharing. It could some people use phantom stocks to do this. There's different ways to do it. But a model for it that I thought was kind of very, very good is if a company had $2 million in profit, just arbitrarily, that, roughly a third, is reserved for capital, like capital investments in the company. A third is shared with the employees, and roughly a third, shared with additional shareholders. Right. So this, and then, this could be wrapped up in an employee profit sharing. It's best to have, kind of most of the company kind of participating in this. If you want them to act like owners, there should be some kind of minimal threshold associated with it, like a minimum level of profit. Obviously, you have to be very clear on the amount of profit that you aspire to generate and in what period. And then it gets distributed into a pool. And then there's some sort of percentage that's shared based on, often I've seen it by, maybe by salary or, percentage of salary or things like that. But so this is kind of an overall framework to think about that fifth principle, sharing is caring, and getting the employees to act like owners. I'll give you an example. So this is Outback Steakhouse. Everybody's probably heard of them. If not, have eaten in one of those. Certainly I have. A few years ago, they were like the thing that customers want is they want a consistent experience, consistent quality. When they go to Outback in this location, it's just like another location. Outback analyzed this and how they can provide more consistency. And the number one thing that was getting in the way was they were turning over managers. They couldn't keep their managers. And so they'd stay for, 6 months and then they'd leave. And so they designed a compensation system, which was quite clever. When they signed a new manager, this is really strange, is they asked them to invest $25,000 into Outback Steakhouse on a 5-year commitment. And if they stayed for 5 years, and performed, they were given $100,000 for their $25,000 investment. And then also after 5 years, they were then eligible for longer term incentives, so stock options and a bonus. I think it was $100,000 bonus through the second 5-year period, and then what equated to $500,000 in stock options. So they were able to dramatically increase the tenure of their managers with these compensation components. It sounds a bit strange, but if you worked there for 10 years, you certainly had a chance to be a millionaire as a manager. And this increased length of tenure resulted in much higher consistency, which is what their customers were looking for when they went to Outback. So that's an example of, sort of long-term incentives in this value profit area, which was quite creative. So let's talk about sales compensation. So these are the 7 principles so it is a critical area, especially if you're a B2B organization selling to get your sales compensation right. There's 7 variables here. I'll talk a little bit about each one as I go through them. So the first one is eligibility. So this is often not clear. Right. So I'm working with an organization right now that is in the tech space, and eligibility for sales compensation should be anyone in the organization that has material influence on the purchase decision. And often it's not just the salesperson. In this case, this organization, they're a technical organization. They have solution architects. You could argue that role is more influential than the salesperson. The salesperson opens up the opportunity, they get the meeting. It very quickly becomes very technical. The client is looking for deep technical skills. They rely heavily on the solution architect. So spending some time thinking through who would be eligible. Often the telesales organization, an inside sales organization is very influential. And maybe excluded from eligibility, but thinking through the sales process, what are actually the steps? Who are the people involved in the steps? And who should be eligible for a sales compensation plan? The second one is total target cash compensation. So, this is the thought process that one goes through when you think about, okay, the industry pays this much, right? What amount of money should a salesperson make at what level of performance? So if they hit 50% of their number, how much should they make? If they hit 75% of their number, how much should they make? If they hit 90% of their number, how much should they make? So I've seen lots of plans that kind of, they don't get paid any commission until they paid for themselves, right, in terms of gross margin, and then they begin to enjoy more compensation as they increase their value. But thinking through this is critically important. Pay mix and leverage, right? So this gets back to my comment about base huggers, right? They want a plan that's 80% base salary and 20% variable. The pay mix depends a little bit on what's the inherent risk of the job. So if you're asking somebody to go out and hunt down 2 new strategic accounts, there's a lot of risk in that. There may need to be a temporary draw or some longer term compensation to deal with that risk. But generally, I see plans that are in the 60-40, 70-30 kind of range on base pay to leverage, and getting the leverage right, the proportion and at what level do they start to earn compensation is a critical lever that you can play with. Here's an example, right? So Nike, this is a little bit different. They pay 15% variable pay for their large strategic accounts, right? They're predictable, right? If you're going into a big retailer and they have a history of buying this much of your product year after year after year, it's fairly predictable. Those involved with selling to smaller independents, their leverage is, 30+%, right? Because there's a lot more risk. Here you see at the bottom, you can see a 70-30 plan. In order for variable comp to be meaningful, it has to be at least 15%. So they have their base salary, they have their target incentive, and then, the idea or the principle is try to get to 3x, the base plan. And generally the experience is that caps don't actually, reduce costs. They actually reduce profit and revenue because it'll constrain your stars from selling more, right? So that's getting that piece is critical. Performance measures are the weights in the compensation system, and there'll be multiple weights, based on different components that are measured in the sales cycle. So here's some examples, right? Volume, right? So either margin, profit, or revenue. I've seen a lot of movement towards compensation around margin. Product mix, I see this a lot in consumer products, goods companies, where there's a mix of products that they're trying to get at a big retailer. What impact in the SaaS community? That's a big measuring impact, helps, measure adoption and resource utilization by phase of the sales cycle. You could have measures that are very specific, to demand creation, right? That's the classic inside sales or BDR, where they're paid based on appointments or they're paid based on revenue that they generate from their leads. It could also be, based on solutioning, or it also could be based on, how well the client serviced and their overall measure of performance. So, 15% is the base threshold, and then getting the right objects or classifications in your measure and weight system. Again, getting back to what's going to drive, what the core, what's going to greatly align to what the core customer expects or wants. Quota distribution, setting the right bar. Generally, the rule of thumb is you want about 2/3 of your sales staff being able to meet their quota. If more than that are making it, your quotas might be too low. If only a fraction are meeting them, maybe it's too high, right? On terms of the performance range, this is the the distribution of when you pay and how much you pay based on performance, and the performance is based on the measures, right? So here's a distribution, right? You can see at the 70% threshold, 10% of the sales reps in this fictitious organization would be, 70% or lower. The vast majority of the reps are between 70% and 175%. And 10% of the reps would be over 175%. So you want to create your performance ranges and when you pay based on what performance in this distribution to incent the right behavior, right? And again, the reference to caps here is, they generally, uncapped upside is generally seems to be more aligned with revenue and profit. And then payment period. So how often do you pay them? There's a cumulative model or a quarterly model. Generally annually is a little bit too long, but determining when, is it monthly, is it quarterly, or is it cumulatively? Cumulatively means that you're only partially paying out until they reach close to their annual numbers. So it's a bit back end loaded. The risk of that is that, you might get a little bit of procrastination on deals. If you really need a deal this quarter and there's not enough financial incentive to do it, the salesperson may not do it. But in low periods, it gives the rep a chance to make up for bad quarters, right? So those are some thoughts on sales compensation. Happy to open it up for questions on either topic, sales or overall compensation design. And answer any of your questions.
Great, Gord. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. There was a question asked about any experience or thoughts regarding differences between compensation when dealing with different countries or cultures, or when you have maybe employees that are in different cultures and different countries in a global organization, how you might create a compensation structure that takes that into account.
Yeah, I have had a little bit of experience with that. Mostly in Europe and the Middle East. So I don't think there's any right way to do it, but different countries, you kind of may relate to different like leverage models. They might be paid, paid at different frequencies. They might have different performance output. So the only thing I've seen clients do is they've had kind of general principles, like they've developed a comp philosophy, and they apply that philosophy. They may have different compensation by country to reflect those differences, but they have a similar overarching comp philosophy for everyone. So they've had to tweak it by country.
There's a question posed, and I'm not sure I understand it necessarily, but how do you distinguish between hunters and farmers?
Yeah, I
And I
understand
guess
it.
on a compensation basis, yeah.
Yeah, so just a general statement. Generally, sales organizations that mix hunters and farmers have lower performance. So it behooves everyone to kind of separate those two. And the hunter to me is somebody who's only focused on new client acquisition. That's all they do. They don't have any existing clients. The existing clients are serviced by another arm of the sales force or account managers, and you hive out, and it's a different set of skills. It requires a different compensation plan because they're out getting new clients. That's all they do.
One of the questions that I had is I think you started the presentation by saying this is difficult to get it right, but if you get it right, you can get it out of sight.
Yeah.
But how often should you come back to review your compensation design and compensation programs, particularly in light of, let's say, right now, inflation is certainly an issue, and that's causing a lot of constraints upon employees, and so is now a time to review this? Is this something you should do once a year, only when certain external circumstances arise? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that your compensation philosophy should be developed and stuck with. Sadly, I think you have to review compensation a lot more frequently now. It's probably a biannual thing. It just by how dynamic the environment is. That doesn't mean you make all wholesale changes, but you're back revisiting it. There's lots of organizations that are, poaching. Your competitors are poaching from your people, right? So yeah, I would say, a twice a year would be a reasonable frequency at this level of or this type of market.
Mark asked the question, what about long-term contracts? Their average sales cycle is 24 to 36 months, and their contract terms are between 5 and 10 years. So how that might play into rewarding the salespeople that are going out and selling those long-term contracts.
Right. So that is a tough one, because I was in that situation, right? So I had one of my first jobs, I had a big telco as a penetration account, and it took me 2 years to crack the count. So I sold nothing for 2 years. That needs to be reflected in the compensation, the investment that the professional would make for a long-term contract. So whether it's in the form of a draw or a bonus that's tied to their account plan with measurable, definitive milestones being met in the account plan, and then like a long-term, the outsourcers are like that, right? They sell $100 million, $200 million contracts that last 10 years. Right, which is a space I'm familiar with. Generally a commission plan is a little difficult. It might be some kind of bonus plan that reflects continued involvement with account and value to make sure that the contract is fulfilled, and the relationships continue to grow. So I think that is very situational specific, and it's also very account specific. Like, what's the account?
If there are other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. One of the questions that I was going to pose to you, Gord, was about you talked about ownership thinking and making employees act and perform and behave like owners. And one of the things that I recently heard was there was a study about, what in terms of employees, what did they think that the business owners or the senior executives took home in terms of compensation? And it was something like 50% of revenue was the sort of the line, where the frontline employees or those who may not be in senior leadership didn't have the financial knowledge to understand why there wasn't enough money in the pool necessarily to compensate them at the rates that they felt like they should be compensated. And I didn't know if you have any thoughts about sort of how do we sort of open, not necessarily opening the books completely, but educating our employees to better understand the financial numbers of the business so that they have the information to know what is and what is not within sort of the ability of the organization to pay out in compensation.
Yeah. I had a lot of direct experience with this. I was a partner in a professional services firm, about 400 people, and we had this problem all the time. And the way we chose to solve it, rightfully or wrongfully, was to have a financial acumen kind of training around how we make money as part of the onboarding for every employee. Mm-hmm. Right, so they understood it. And secondly, we showed the entire company P&L once a month at the company meeting in detail. Here's how we did last month, right? And right down to the net profit. So when we had a bad month, everybody knew about it, and we had a good month. And there started to be a greater appreciation. I don't know that you can get everyone on board with that, but if you want them to act like an owner, you kind of have to treat them like an owner. Right. That to me was the kind of learning in that situation.
Sounds great. All right. Well, we have reached the top of the hour, and I don't see any other questions coming in through the chat. So I want to thank everybody for attending today's Coach webinar. A huge thank you to Gord for a great presentation. You can learn more about him by visiting his website at Alta, that's ALTA consulting.ca. Or you can find him obviously on LinkedIn as well. As always, we encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions about strategic planning, using the Align software to sort of help you execute on some of these priorities in terms of setting compensation packages within your organization. If you need assistance or more information, please be sure to ask your Align advisor or simply email us at support@aligntoday.com. Thanks again, and we hope you will join us for our next Coach webinar, which may not be until the next year. I think we will probably take the month of December off, and we wish all of you the best of luck in finishing the year strong, planning for 2023, and hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. Gord, thank you so much. Until next time, we hope you have a great day.